They called her when they needed the dirty work done. When a horse kicked over its water trough, they called Nia. When the stable floor was thick with mud after rain, they called Nia. When the rich guests arrived and the royal horses needed to shine like polished midnight, they called Nia. But when food was passed around, her bowl came last. When names were spoken with respect, hers was never among them. And when the queen herself walked through the royal stables that morning, nobody expected her eyes to stop on the wrist of the poorest girl in the building. Nobody expected the queen to go pale. Nobody expected her hand to begin shaking. And nobody, absolutely nobody, expected the queen to whisper, in a voice that sounded like something breaking after 19 years, "Where did you get that bracelet?" Because the bracelet on Nia's wrist was not just old gold. It was not just decoration. It was not something you could buy in the market, or inherit from a village aunt, or find lying in dust. That bracelet had disappeared the same night the queen's baby vanished. The same night the palace said the child was gone forever. The same night a mother was left with grief. A kingdom was left with silence. And one small lie was buried under 19 years of royal ceremony. Or at least, that was what everyone believed. If you enjoy powerful African storytelling filled with buried truth, royal secrets, and emotional justice, stay with this story until the end. Because what happened inside that stable did not stay inside that stable. It shook the palace, the council, and every person who had ever mistaken silence for weakness. Tonight's story begins in the kingdom of Amandi, where walls remembered more than people did. The palace of Amandi stood above the city on a hill of red stone, its towers catching the sunrise before the markets below had even opened their first baskets. From far away, it looked untouchable, as though the people inside it belonged to another world entirely. But every palace has its underside. Every throne has rooms where servants bend low. Every silk corridor is supported by hands roughened by work. Nia lived in that hidden part of the palace. She was 19 years old and worked in the royal stables behind the eastern gate, where the smell of hay, leather, horse sweat, and wet earth clung to everything. Her room was no more than a narrow space beside the feed store, separated from the tack room by a thin wooden wall that let in every sound at night. Hooves shifting, chains clinking, stable boys laughing, rats scratching in the corners. She had no mother there, no father, no family name that opened doors, only the name Mama Sifa had given her. Mama Sifa had been the widow of a horse groom, a stern but warm woman who had raised Nia in a small clay house beyond the city wells. She had taught her how to wake before dawn, how to work without complaint, how to read people by the way they stepped into a room, and how never to let hunger turn her bitter. "The world may make you small," Mama Sifa used to say, "but do not help it." Mama Sifa had died 2 years earlier during the long fever season. Before she died, she tied a bracelet around Nia's wrist and said only this: "Do not sell it. Do not remove it. One day, someone will know what it means." Nia had laughed then through tears. She thought grief had loosened the old woman's mind. It was a small bracelet, beautiful but strange. Gold, but not bright gold. Old gold. The kind that had lived through many hands and many years. Tiny carved patterns circled it, baobab leaves, crescent lines, and at the clasp, a symbol like a rising sun inside a circle. Nia wore it because it was the last thing Mama Sifa had touched, not because she believed it meant anything. That morning, before the queen came, Nia was bent over the leg of a restless black stallion named Quito, cleaning dried mud from the animal's hoof. "Faster!" snapped Madame Dara, the head of the stable attendants. "The queen's guests arrive by midday. Must I teach you the same work every week?" Nia lowered her head. "No, madam." Dara clicked her tongue. "Then move as if your body belongs to the morning and not to sleep." The other stable girls kept their eyes down. Nobody interfered when Dara spoke like that. She was not the most powerful woman in the palace, not by far, but she was powerful enough over them. Nia rose, carried the water pail outside, and crossed the courtyard between the stables just as the royal procession entered from the north path. The queen rarely came to the stables. That alone made everyone nervous. Servants straightened. Stable boys wiped their hands on their wrappers. Guards shifted their spears. Queen Zalika walked with the calm dignity of someone long practiced in carrying both authority and sorrow. She was still beautiful, though not with the beauty of youth. Hers was the beauty of endurance. Her robes were deep indigo trimmed with gold thread. Her face was composed, but her eyes held the faraway heaviness of someone who had once lost too much and never fully returned from it. Beside her walked Lady Maroa, chief advisor to the royal household. Maroa was a woman of precise speech and polished cruelty, the kind whose smile always looked borrowed. Queen Zalika had come to inspect the ceremonial horses before the harvest procession. That was all. At least, that was what everyone thought. Then Quito, the black stallion, caught scent of something sharp in the air and jerked violently. The groom holding him lost his grip. The animal reared, hooves slashing the space before him. Men shouted. Someone dropped a bucket. One guard stumbled back so hard he nearly fell into the trough. The queen froze. Lady Maroa screamed for the guards, but Naya moved. She stepped directly into the horse's path, lifted both hands, and began speaking in the low, steady tone Mama Sifa had once used for frightened animals. "Easy now. Easy, Quito. No one is hunting you. No one is taking your sky." The stallion thrashed once more, then snorted hard, stamping the ground. Naya placed one hand gently against his neck. The courtyard held its breath. Slowly, the horse lowered. The danger passed. And as Naya reached for the fallen reins, the sleeve of her rough brown wrapper slid back from her wrist. The queen saw the bracelet. Her face changed. Not slightly, completely. "Hold her," Queen Zalika said. No one moved, not because they wished to disobey, but because the command had come out almost as a whisper. The queen stepped forward herself. Her eyes locked on Naya's wrist. Her fingers hovered above the bracelet, but did not touch it at first, as though she feared it might disappear if she moved too suddenly. "Where," the queen said carefully, "did you get this?" Naya swallowed. "It belonged to my mother, Your Majesty." The queen closed her eyes. "No," she said. "No. That bracelet belonged to my child." 19 years earlier, the whole kingdom of Amandi had drowned in mourning. The late King Jabari had died during the flood year, leaving Queen Zalika pregnant and alone on the throne. The palace had been tense for months. Advisors whispered. Council members chose sides. Nobles smiled too carefully. A ruler without an heir is watched one way. A ruler carrying one is watched another. When the queen's labor came, it was long and brutal. By dawn, the palace announced that the baby girl had died. No grand naming ceremony followed, no drums of celebration, only mourning cloth and careful silence. The queen had begged to hold her child, but they told her the baby had been taken away already, because the queen herself had nearly died and needed to be spared further pain. It was Lady Maroa who managed those chambers, Lady Maroa who spoke to the physicians, Lady Maroa who arranged the attendants, Lady Maroa who stood at the queen's bedside and said with moist eyes and perfect restraint, "Rest, your majesty. Let the dead belong to mercy." Zuleika had never forgiven herself for not seeing the child's face. She had carried that wound like a hidden blade for 19 years. And now, in the stable courtyard, she was looking at the bracelet she herself had clasped around her newborn daughter's wrist. Only one had ever been made. The royal goldsmith had forged it from old palace gold and inscribed a phrase inside the band in a private family script used only by the queens of Amandi. No market jeweler could copy it. No servant family could own it by accident. Queen Zuleika lifted Nia's hand and turned the bracelet toward the light. Inside the band, almost too faint to see, was the inscription, "For the child who returns the dawn." The queen staggered back one step. Lady Maroa's face went still. Too still. "Nonsense," she said at once. "Your Majesty, this girl must have stolen it." Nia looked up, hurt blazing through her shock. "I stole nothing." Maroa's gaze cut toward her like a knife. "Mind your tongue." But the queen was no longer listening to Maroa. She was looking at Nia's face now. Properly looking. Not at her clothes, not at her station, not at her lowered posture. At her face, at the shape of her eyes, at the line of her cheek, at the quiet stubbornness in her mouth. And something old and buried began rising in the queen's chest. "Bring her to the inner chamber," Queen Zuleika said. Maroa stepped forward quickly. "Your Majesty, surely it would be wiser to question her under guard first. A servant can be coached. A thief can lie." The queen turned. For the first time that day, steel entered her voice. "And a mother can recognize what was tied to her own child." Silence fell over the courtyard. Nia was taken, not to a cell, not to the guardhouse, but to a small receiving chamber beside the queen's private garden. She had never entered such a room before. The cushions alone looked softer than anything she had ever touched. Bowls of white flowers filled the air with sweetness. Light came in through carved screens and patterned the floor in gold. Nia stood barefoot on polished stone, clutching her own hands. Queen Zuleika dismissed nearly everyone. Nearly. Lady Maroa remained. So did one palace guard named Kamau, because the queen trusted his silence more than most people's speeches. "Tell me about the bracelet," said the queen. Nia answered honestly. About Mama Sifa, about the dying words, about never taking it off. "Who was Mama Sifa?" "A widow, Your Majesty. She raised me." "From birth?" Nia hesitated.
She said she found me when I was a baby,
left in a basket at the back of the old stables with a cloth and the bracelet. Maroa moved too quickly. "There, you see, foundlings are common. Someone could have stripped a burial bundle years ago." The queen's eyes did not leave Nia. "What cloth?" Nia frowned, trying to remember. "Red and gold, torn at one corner. Mama Sifa kept it folded in her trunk." "Do you still have it?" "Yes." The queen sat back slowly. because red and gold had been the exact colors of the royal birthing cloth prepared for that night 19 years ago. Morowa spoke again, carefully this time. Your Majesty, grief can make even wise people vulnerable to hope. Queen Zalika turned her face toward her advisor. And fear, she said softly, can make guilty people speak too soon. Morowa's expression did not break, but something in the room had changed. By evening, the palace had split into two kinds of people, those who had heard something and those who were pretending not to hear it. Rumor moved through royal buildings faster than wind moves through dry grass. Before sunset, kitchen women were whispering over stockpots, guards were trading looks in the corridors, and junior clerks were suddenly very interested in old records. Queen Zalika ordered Naya housed in the guest wing under her personal protection. That alone shocked the palace. A stable girl did not become a guest in a single day unless the world had begun to tilt. Naya sat on the edge of a bed too soft for sleep, while Kamau stood at the door and watched the corridor. You are afraid, he said quietly. Yes, Naya replied. Good. It means you still see clearly. She gave a humorless breath of laughter. That is a strange comfort. Kamau leaned against the carved frame. In a palace, strange comfort is often the only honest kind. He had noticed Naya long before this day. Not in the way men sometimes notice a pretty servant and mistake that for kindness. He had noticed the way she worked, the way she treated frightened horses, the way she spoke little and listened much. There are some people whose dignity appears before their name does. That night, at the Queen's order, the old trunk of Mama Sifa was brought from Naya's room beside the stable store. Inside were simple things: a wrapped comb, a patched shawl, a pouch of copper coins, and beneath them, folded carefully in cloth that smelled faintly of cedar and smoke, the red and gold birthing fabric. When Queen Zalika touched it, her hands trembled. She had chosen that cloth herself. A seamstress named Mama Ireti had embroidered the border with tiny sunbursts and millet flowers so the child would arrive wrapped in blessing. In one corner was the tear, exactly where the Queen remembered grabbing it during labor. She did not weep immediately. Sometimes grief is too large for tears. Sometimes it arrives first as silence. But when the cloth was opened fully over the table, Queen Zalika put her hand to her mouth and bent forward as if the room itself had struck her. Lady Morowa was not present for that moment. She had excused herself earlier, saying she needed to prepare for the morning council. Instead, she went to the old archive corridor, where a retired physician's assistant named Bero now kept medicine lists. Tell me, Morowa said, her voice low and cold. Who else still lives from that night? Bero looked confused. My lady? The birthing night. Think carefully. Bero's face drained. Only the midwife, perhaps. Mama Ireti, the seamstress. The stable widow Sifa is dead. Morowa's jaw tightened. Too many old people were still breathing. Back in the guest chamber, the Queen asked Nia for one more thing. Did Mama Sifa ever tell you not to trust anyone? Nia nodded slowly. Only one person. She never spoke the name. She would say, if a smiling woman from the palace ever asks too much, close your mouth and walk away. Kamau and the Queen exchanged a glance. The Queen rose. Then we do not wait for rumor to grow teeth, she said. We go to the living witnesses tonight. Mama Ireti, the old seamstress, lived near the dye-maker's quarter, in a house filled with folded fabrics and fading light. She was nearly blind, but her fingers still moved over cloth with the memory of their former precision. When Queen Zelika entered, Ireti tried to kneel. The queen stopped her. Then Nia stepped forward, holding the birthing cloth. The old seamstress reached for it, touched the border, felt the raised embroidery, and began to cry before anyone said a word. "I stitched this," she whispered, "for the queen's daughter." Her cloudy eyes turned toward Nia's face. Then her hands, old as they were, found the girl's cheeks and held them gently. "Oh," she said, "oh, child." Queen Zelika's voice shook. "Tell me what you know." Ireti took a long breath. "Not much, only what I saw after. Lady Maroa came through the birthing rooms before dawn, carrying a covered bundle, too large for medicine, too careful for linen. The midwife was crying. The physician would not meet my eyes. By noon, the palace announced the child was dead." "Why did you never speak?" "Because I was a seamstress, Your Majesty." "Not a council member, not a noble. And fear wears heavy shoes in palace halls." That was the first witness. Not enough to restore a life, but enough to crack the lie wider. The second witness lived beyond the old market, under a neem tree that leaned over her roof like an old guard. Mama Binta, once royal midwife to the house of Amandi, opened her door with a lamp in one hand. She saw the queen. She saw Nia, and the lamp nearly slipped from her fingers. "No," she whispered. "God has brought the child back." Inside, the room smelled of ginger, balm leaves, and thyme. Mama Binta did not need much urging. She had been waiting 19 years to speak. "The baby lived," she said. "She cried strong. I washed her myself. I wrapped her myself. I placed the bracelet myself on her tiny wrist, because Your Majesty had fainted and asked me before labor, 'If I cannot speak, make sure she enters the world adorned with joy.'" Queen Zelika closed her eyes. Binta continued. "Lady Maroa dismissed everyone but me and the physician. Then she said the kingdom was unstable, the council divided, and a female heir would weaken the throne before she could stand. She said the child would be hidden, raised elsewhere, and later perhaps returned if useful." The queen stared at her in horror. "If useful?" Binta nodded bitterly. "That is the language of people who worship power. They speak of children like coins." Nia sat very still. Her whole life, every cold morning, every command, every insult, every hungry night, had suddenly become part of a sentence spoken by strangers before she could even speak her own name. "Who took me?" she asked. "Mama Sifa," said Binta softly. "But not by greed, by mercy. She was married to a stable groom loyal to the late king. Maroa thought a poor widow would be easy to control. Sifa took you and disappeared before dawn 2 days later. I believe she chose love over obedience." Kamau exhaled. The queen spoke so quietly that all three leaned toward her to hear. "And the physician?" "Dead 6 years now," Binta said. "But before he died, he sent one thing to me." From a wooden box under her sleeping mat, the old midwife pulled out a sealed parchment. "It is his confession," she said. "He never had courage in public, only at the edge of the grave." The Queen broke the seal. The physician's letter was short, trembling, and devastating. He admitted that the child had lived. He admitted Lady Maroa ordered the death announcement. He admitted the Queen had been deceived. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Nia asked the question at the center of everything. "If all this is true, why did no one come for me?"
The Queen turned to her, eyes full.
"Because," she said, "I was made to grieve a living child. And grief is a prison when it is built by trusted hands." By dawn, Lady Maroa understood that the matter had escaped her. Too many witnesses, too many objects, too much memory returning at once. So she changed tactics. When lies cannot survive daylight, they often reach for force. A kitchen runner loyal to Kamau overheard two guards being reassigned to the guest wing by Maroa's order, not the Queen's. One of them asked, "Why move the girl before the council?" And the other answered, "When powerful people clean a mess, they prefer no fingerprints." Kamau was at Nia's door before sunrise. "We leave now," he said. Nia rose instantly. "Where?" "To the Queen." They crossed the garden passage in silence, just as two unfamiliar guards entered the guest corridor from the west side. Too late. Queen Zelika received them, already dressed for council, a woman no longer moving like the wounded mother of yesterday, but like the ruler Amandi had almost forgotten it possessed. Maroa arrived moments later, elegant as ever. "Your Majesty," she said, "the council is assembled." "So am I," said the Queen. The council chamber filled by the hour of first drums. Nobles in layered robes, elders in ceremonial cloth, 3 military captains, the royal judge, clerks with ink and tablets. And at the far center, beneath the carved emblem of Amandi's sun crest, the Queen. Nia stood to her right. That alone sent a ripple through the room. Lady Maroa stood to the left, still betting everything on performance. She opened first. "For 19 years," she said smoothly, "I have served this palace with loyalty. Today, a servant girl, coached by old people and guided by palace rumor, is being used to disturb the order of succession with sentiment and forged relics." Some council heads nodded. Not in belief, in habit. Maroa had ruled by habit for a long time. Then Queen Zelika stood. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. "She speaks of loyalty," the Queen said. "So let us hear from those whose loyalty was forced into silence." Mama Ireti came first, then Mama Binta. Then the physician's confession was read aloud. Each word stripped another layer from Maroa's mask. Still, she fought. "Old women remember what grief teaches them to remember," she said. "A dead man's letter can be forged. A bracelet can be stolen." At that, Queen Zelika lifted the bracelet from Nia's wrist and handed it to the royal goldsmith, who had been summoned that morning. He examined it under full light. Then he bowed deeply.
"I made this," he said, "with these hands, 19 years ago, for the Queen's daughter. The inner inscription is in my engraving style. The hinge carries my private maker's mark under the clasp. No copy exists." The room shifted. Maroa's fingers tightened. Then the Queen gave the last instruction. "Bring the naming ledger." Gasps moved around the chamber. Because in Amandi, royal children were recorded twice, once by the physicians, and once in the sacred naming ledger kept by the shrine keeper. It was not a public record, it was a spiritual one, and Lady Maroa had forgotten it, or believed it destroyed. The shrine keeper, an old man with a voice like dry leaves, entered carrying wrapped leather. He opened the ledger, and there, on the page from 19 years earlier, written before dawn had ended, was the entry. A female child born to Queen Zalika, to be named Princess Amari, bracelet of dawn clasped at birth. The chamber went still. Not quiet, still. There is a silence that comes when people are no longer deciding what is true, but realizing what truth will cost. Lady Maroa understood before anyone spoke. She was finished. "You thought a girl would weaken the throne," Queen Zalika said. Maroa lifted her chin. "I thought survival required hard choices. You stole a child. I preserved the kingdom. You preserved your influence." For the first time, Maroa's voice rose. "I preserved order when men on that very council were already choosing which branch of your family to support if you died in childbirth. I did what weak hearts could not." "Weak hearts," the queen repeated. Her grief had burned all night into something harder. "You buried my daughter alive inside poverty, and call that strength." Maroa looked at Nia then. Properly looked. Maybe for the first time in her life. And Nia saw no remorse there. Only calculation grieving its own defeat. "You survived," Maroa said to her, almost sharply. "Many do not." Nia stepped forward. The chamber watched her. All her life, people had spoken over her, around her, through her, as though she were the floor beneath them. Now they had no choice but to hear her. "I survived," Nia said, "because a poor woman chose to love me more than powerful people feared me. Do not place your evil beside my survival as if they are related." Maroa said nothing. Nia continued. "You left me in the shadow of the palace I was born in. You let me scrub its filth, feed its horses, and bow to people who should have known my name before I knew theirs. You did not spare me. You erased me." The last word rang harder than a shout. Several council members lowered their eyes. Because truth, when spoken plainly, often exposes more than one guilty person. Queen Zalika turned to the royal judge. "Record this," she said. "Lady Maroa is stripped, detained, and charged before the full tribunal of Amandi with royal deception, unlawful removal of an heir, and conspiracy against the crown." Guards stepped forward. Maroa did not beg. Proud people rarely do. But as they took her arms, she looked once more at Nia and saw what she had failed to destroy. Not merely a lost child, but a living claim. A life returned. A truth standing upright. After the council rose, the chamber emptied slowly, as if no one trusted the world outside to still be the same world they had entered that morning. Nia remained where she stood. So did the queen. Neither knew how to cross 19 years in a single room. Titles could be restored in a sentence. Blood could be proven in a ledger. But lost time is not a door that swings open because a judge says so. Queen Zalika approached first. Her face was wet now. The tears had finally come. "I named you Amari," she said. "It means the one who carries grace after pain." Nia, Amari, looked at her mother and felt something shift inside her that had no language. All her life she had imagined Mother as warmth, or voice, or memory. Not this living woman with royal rings and trembling hands. Not this stranger whose eyes looked painfully like her own. "I do not know how to do this," Nia said honestly. The Queen gave a broken little smile. "Neither do I." That was the first true thing between them. Not ceremony, not destiny, not lineage. Honesty. The Queen reached up slowly, giving the girl time to move away if she wished. Nia did not move. Zalika touched her cheek. Then she pulled her into her arms. What happened then was not graceful. It was not queenly. It was not composed. It was a mother holding the daughter she had mourned for 19 years, and a daughter being held for the first time by the woman whose absence had shaped her whole life. The guards looked away. Kamau did not. He stood with his hands behind his back and let himself witness it fully, as one should witness the return of something sacred. When they parted, the Queen laughed through tears. "You smell like horses." Nia almost smiled. "I work in the stables." "And I," said the Queen, pressing her forehead briefly against her daughter's, "have missed 19 years of obvious things." Amandi did not become a perfect kingdom in a day. No kingdom ever does. But some things changed quickly. The palace announced before sunset that the lost daughter of Queen Zalika had been found and restored as Princess Amari of Amandi. The city erupted. Drums answered from the market square. Women ululated from balconies. Men who had never seen the inside of royal walls argued over details they did not know and did not care to know, because joy had already outrun accuracy. Inside the palace, changes came more quietly, but more deeply. Princess Amari refused to leave the stables untouched. "The place that kept me alive," she said, "will not remain a place of humiliation." Every stable worker received wages recorded in writing for the first time. Sleeping rooms were repaired. Madame Dara was dismissed after 3 girls, now finally brave enough to speak, told what life under her had been. Kamau was promoted to captain of the Queen's Eastern Guard. Mama Binta was given a home within palace grounds, where she spent evenings under a fig tree, telling children they should arrive in the world screaming, because silence helps the wrong people. Mama Ireti was appointed keeper of ceremonial cloth, and she cried so hard at the honor that she had to sit down before she could accept. As for Nia Amari, she did not stop being herself when the palace changed her clothes. That is important. Some people think restoration means becoming someone new. It does not. It means no longer being forced to live beneath what was already true. She learned royal history. She learned council law. She learned how to sit through long political arguments without showing that she would rather be with horses. But she also kept going to the eastern stables at dawn. Sometimes to walk, sometimes to think, sometimes only to smell hay and remember Mama Sifa. Queen Zalika found her there one morning, weeks later. "You still come here," the Queen said. Amari nodded. "This is where I learned patience." The Queen looked around at the stalls, the tools, the dust caught in sunlight. "And survival." Amari rested a hand on Kito's neck. "Yes, that too." The Queen followed her gaze. I would like, she said slowly, for there to be a memorial built for Mama Sifa. Not hidden, not private. Public. She protected what the palace betrayed. Amari's eyes filled. That would honor me, she said, because it would honor her. And so it was done. At the edge of the palace grounds, not far from the eastern gate, they built a small stone pavilion with her name carved into it. Mama Sifa, who chose mercy over fear. People began leaving flowers there. Servants first, then guards, then townspeople who had never known her. Sometimes history changes because kings command it,
And sometimes because ordinary goodness, once finally seen, becomes impossible to ignore. Months later, on the morning of the harvest procession, Princess Amari stood before the great bronze mirror in the Queen's dressing hall, while attendants fastened ceremonial gold around her arms. On her wrist, beneath everything else, remained the old bracelet. The same one. Never replaced, never hidden. Queen Zelika entered and dismissed the attendants with a nod. For a moment, she simply looked at her daughter. No grief now. Not the old kind. Only the tender astonishment of someone still learning that answered prayers sometimes arrive wearing dust. "You are ready," said the Queen. Amari smiled faintly. "I have always been ready. I was simply unknown." The Queen laughed softly. "That sounds like your mother. It sounds like both of us." Outside, the city was waiting. Drums rolled. Horses stamped. Sunlight struck the palace towers until they gleamed like fire. As mother and daughter walked toward the procession court side by side, servants bowed, guards saluted, and council members stepped aside. Not because cloth had changed, not because gold had been added, but because truth had been restored. And the truth of Nia's story, of Princess Amari's story, is this. Power often believes it can rename reality. It believes it can bury a child in silence, bury justice in protocol, bury memory beneath ceremony, and bury dignity beneath hard labor. Sometimes it succeeds, for a while, sometimes for years. But truth is patient. Truth survives in old cloth, in a dying woman's last instruction, in the hands of a midwife, in the conscience of the frightened, in the memory of a mother. And when truth finally stands in the light, the people who once looked through you must learn to look at you directly. So if you have ever felt unseen, if life has ever placed you in the shadow of places built by others, remember this. Being ignored does not make you small. Being hidden does not make you nothing. And being delayed does not mean being denied forever. Because what belongs to you may walk a long road before it returns. But when it returns with your name.